Hi, welcome to What's My Podcast. I'm Jen and I'm a library specialist for Arapahoe Library District. In the last couple years, I've gravitated toward podcast listening for knowledge and entertainment. Whenever I have a question about an author, subject, or event, I think, I bet there's a podcast for that. I also love that you can get a lot of information in a short amount of time. I spend a lot of time listening to different content, and I'd love to share some suggestions with you. Today's segment is Vintage Hollywood. Please note that some episodes may not be suitable for all listeners. My first podcast recommendation is You Must Remember This, which is dedicated to exploring the secret and/or forgotten histories of Hollywood's first century. You Must Remember This was created by Karina Longworth, who is an author and journalist that has dedicated her career to film history. This podcast is for you if you want to peek inside the darkness and controversy of old Hollywood. Next is Unremembered Hollywood. This is a comedy satire podcast in the form of old-timey noir radio productions from the perspective of a Hollywood historian. Some of the characters were real people, but they probably never said these words in this order. This podcast is for you if you like lighthearted storytelling with a vintage Hollywood twist. Next is True Stories of Tinseltown. Grace Collins found her love of old Hollywood as a child watching films with her dad. In this podcast, Grace talks with guests and produces special series such as History of Blonde Bombshells. There's talk of scandals, actors and actresses, and everything that's a true story from Tinseltown. This podcast is for you if you love history, scandal, and true crime. In Murder in Hollywoodland, James Remar and Tracy Patton reenact one of the most iconic whodunit cases of the 20th century. It's February 2nd, 1922, and all of Hollywood is about to wake up and learn that William Desmond Taylor, the most famous film director in town, was murdered in his home last night. The investigation will shine a light on some of Hollywood's most scandalous affairs, backroom deals, and underground drug dens. This podcast will leave you guessing and second-guessing who killed William Desmond Taylor for weeks to come. This podcast is for you if you love mystery, history, and a good reenactment. My last recommendation today is Old Hollywood Realness. This is a podcast dedicated to celebrating all of the glitz and glamour of the silver screen. Join Kathleen Knoll and Philip Estrada as they gab, gush, and recap all the classics. This is a time-traveling journey from the black and white flicks to the Technicolor dreams of Hollywood produced in the heydays of a studio system. Kathleen and Philip both work in the fashion industry and both have a love of vintage Hollywood films and fashion. This podcast is for you if you love glamour, fashion, and old movies. There are so many podcasts being produced that it can take time to find what you like. I recommend checking out the You Might Also Like list at the bottom of each show page. You can also search in your podcast app with keywords such as the subject or an author's name. All these podcasts can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you like to listen.